This is Troy McGuinness, and you're listening to the Agile Uprising podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I am this episode's host, Jay Hrcsko. Joined with me tonight, I have Andrew Leff.
Hey.
Paul Elia.
Hello.
And James Gifford.
What's up?
And the topic of this episode is going to be scaling anti-patterns. So the four of us have been through multiple transformations at different levels, and we've seen Agile attempted to scale in different orgs of different sizes, some successful, more often than not, some not. So we wanted to get together and just go a little bit around the table about what we've seen, what we've experienced as far as anti-patterns go, what ways to prevent them, ways to see them coming before they actually happen, before to prevent your management and or leadership from doing something untoward. And then once it does happen, how do we get out from under it to make sure that that inadvertent, unintelligent, for lack of a better term, change doesn't stick? So I'm going to throw one out there first and see if you guys have seen this, and then we'll go from there. So when I think of some of the things I've seen that the orgs I've been a part of done screwy as far as scaling, one of the things I noticed is in the rush to fill the product manager and program manager and even product owner roles, right? There is always the concern that you put the wrong person there, but that's okay because sometimes people have to learn. I think the bigger problem I get is where we make someone a program manager who's responsible for a whole train of people, and they don't do it full time, or they try to delegate, or they'll have I'm technically the product manager, but I'm going to delegate my other underling from my waterfall world, James Gifford, to attend all the meetings for me and to attend all the ceremonies and see how, have him run interference in me. And it not only defeats the purpose, but it gets real dicey real quickly. So have any of you also seen this where the people, hopefully from the business, are not fully dedicated, or they try to run a third party in as proxy and then things go sideways? Leff, I'm going to start with you because I think you probably have seen this, being as you've been to quite a few places.
I've never seen that ever. I think you're uniquely alone in that. Yes. So, I mean, to me, this is it's an issue, regardless of framework or methodology. And it just goes back to the fact that that's not an Agile problem. I mean, they were probably that way when they were doing something different. It's probably just a people problem at that point. Everyone's a resistor, but if you had to find the positive in that is, some of those resistors can become your greatest allies because they are vocal and they are disruptive if you can just get them to use that in a more meaningful way.
How about you, James? Ever seen anything like this?
I've definitely seen my fair share of proxies and things like that to accomplish I don't see the value in the product owner role. So, this person could do 50% of their job while, they maintain the collections business. We've seen it a number of times, and, it's kind of a shame because it does generally screw things up and causes a lot of downstream headaches and problems. People should realize that you got to staff these things, and you got to be able to make the tough decisions in your organization of, if you're net neutral headcount, where you're going to get these bodies from. And sometimes you're just going to have to shuffle the deck to if you want to properly staff things.
Well, go on, Paul. You're on mute, my friend.
We can edit that out in the podcast, right? All right. So, two things come to mind. One general and one targeted to the question you asked. One is that these anti-patterns could be Agile or not, like Andrew said, and I don't think scaled Agile or not applies necessarily. It's just, to me, if you don't get your patterns healthy at the team level, scaling is just going to magnify the anti-pattern, the badness. So you're talking about product owner type role, for example. I have a personal experience of having been in an organization that took on SAFE and made a bunch of product owners, and I was one of them. And it felt like a demotion the way it was done. It was very much forced on us, and the role of product manager felt more strategic before the rollout of thou shalt write user stories given when then blah, blah, blah. So I've seen that, but it's, in terms of part-time and proxies, seen it, and also had the firsthand experience of thinking, I need somebody to help me at this, because I just don't want to sit here and write given when then all day long. I kind of want to talk to customers. I kind of want to make sure that we're solving the problem our markets need solved. So
true. And Leff, I know you wanted to add something, but to your point, Paul, you don't want to get stuck in that rut of doing the given when then all day. However, there's a difference between that, because you don't want to get bogged down in the minutia, I think, and I'm going to outsource my actual responsibilities, like the meat of the role,
no, I get you,
to someone else because I have a quote unquote day job. I just think that's a
sure.
dicey proposition. Leff?
Yeah, and to be clear, when we're talking about proxies, it's this weird thing. I've gone into a bunch of organizations that actually create that role, proxy product owner, right?
Yep.
And how do you serve a team as a product proxy owner? What does that even mean? Even if you are going to create another role, do you actually define what that role is? So I think the break is when you start to scale, if that's already in place, right, you amplify that bad behavior, that anti-pattern. So if you're embracing the product owner role, why would you need a proxy? You're dedicated to developing the product and delivering business value based upon all the responsibilities as a product owner. Why would you? It's like being a little bit pregnant. You can't. So they need to be 100% dedicated to being a product owner.
Some of the other context to that, though, is, I've seen it where at some point in time, the product management group and the BAs that used to support that group, they stopped getting along. Mom and dad got a divorce. I got this group of BAs over here that we're in business, but now they're in technology. And, now they're in a product owner role, as kind of going into the Agile transformation, but the product management group is still all customer, all strategy, and then these people in this role over here are more execution and trying to communicate. It's a telephone between the two
Exactly.
groups. So that's just as bad. I mean, if the Scrum Guide wants the product owner to be kind of focused on the whole solution, the old single wringable neck, if we want to still use those terms. So it's a lot of companies get these roles wrong. They can't get the simple. There's three roles: the Scrum Master, product owner, and the team.
Well, if we talk about scaling, though, that you get a lot more roles, right? So
that's right.
So if you have role nausea as an organization to begin with, because there's so many roles, now you're just creating more roles and you're scaling it, and no one really understands what I have that more often than not. We need to be told what our role is. And if you tell them, if you just use product owner, the Scrum Guide description for a product owner, or the guidance, it's never enough, right? They need a checklist. They want to be told what they are responsible to do. And in my experience, and I probably shouldn't say it, but I'm going to, is they're product owners that have never done anything in a product. Like, what made them a product owner? Where did they come from? What skill set did they possess that someone thought that they would be a good product owner?
Well, it's because they're a business SME, and everybody knows that a business SME makes the best product owner.
I don't see many business SMEs as product owners either, which is even more interesting. I see people that are just, they need a new role. So they plop someone in there.
I also think, you touch on a good point where you talk about how people want to know exactly what their role title is and exactly what my role implies and what is part of this role. I think that comes down to, and we've all had this conversation, a lot of the problems we see in transformations are due to misplaced incentives, misaligned incentives, where people think that if I have this title and I have this role and I have this job description, as long as I have this title and this role and this job description and I check all those boxes, I am now due for my bonus at the end of the year. And I forget who we had on the phone. Who we had? I think maybe it was the Jeffs. It was Goat Health, maybe, where he said that it comes down to misaligned incentives. I think that plays a big part of it. And Leff, you almost let the cat out of the bag in your opening statement, where you made the remark that this is not necessarily an Agile problem, it's an organizational problem. And I think a lot of the things that we're going to end up discussing tonight regarding scaling anti-patterns really are organizational problems applied that we try to cover up with scale, and like Gifford said, it amplifies it.
Yeah, and I think, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, because honestly, it's hard to scale values in principles. We're really just scaling practices, and we're in figuring out how to get people to actually collaborate. So
Jay, I think this could be an interesting segue into something that I was thinking about. Is that okay?
Yeah, shoot.
So I think this falls in line also with something that always pops in my head. Introduce agility as just another business process. That's an anti-pattern within itself, right? Not necessarily systemic in the organization, but coming in and bringing Agile in, it's just going to be another business process. We're just going to treat this just like anything else. And then you scale that, or you go in as a scaling mindset, and it just goes crazy. It explodes all over the place. I'm curious if you guys think that's similar to an anti-pattern.
That I've never seen that, but that's actually quite terrifying now that I try and wrap my head around it. But I could see where that could really be an issue, where somebody comes and says, "Hey, we're doing Agile." They're adding it like a phase gate process, right? Oh, we're going to add Agile to it, and I can see where that would totally be just an absolute, just a mess. How about you, Gifford?
I mean, that's the story of a lot of our lives. A lot of companies come in and bring Agile in for the process sake. We talk about individuals and interactions, but it is a lot of these people treat it as a process replacement. And if you're using it as an act, if you're using it to act your way to new thinking, and use it as a stepping stone to transform your organization, that's one thing. But most companies can't get past, we're just doing the mechanics of Agile, the mechanics of the practices. And when they're not getting the results they want, they're like, well, it's Agile's fault. And it's like, well, no, it's not Agile's fault. It's you're not really taking it past the bare mechanics. You're not fixing the cultural problems that your organization has. You're not fixing, in more organizations that I go into, there's a real problem with trust and safety. And, we were just kind of we were talking around like, wanting races and wanting that specific role description. It's because if they want to be able to say, it's not my job. I mean, we might as well be doing rough. We might as well be going back to rough, where, you could play the blame game and never deliver anything and it was okay. So, it's a lot of these fundamental practice problems is people aren't willing to make the investment in changing your corporate culture. And they think that bringing in practices and using that to scale what they deem Agile is their silver bullet. And it's not.
I think we talk about mindset a lot. Once you've got the mindset, however you came into it, you do get that. You can have conversations with other people and okay, you do have the Agile mindset. This is cool, we can talk. But selling mindset at the business level is super tough. And what we want are outcomes and results at the business level, right? But the ceremonies and the practices are the things that are easy, I think. They're mechanical, but they may or may not produce the results, and they probably won't if you don't get true agility in your blood.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I want to switch gears a little bit. Another anti-pattern that I've seen actually more than once, it's a little bit scary, is when you try to do an Agile transformation in an enterprise org, there's typically a large production support contingent, right? Large amount of teams that do prod support, aka tier 3, what have you. I've been involved in one transformation where the first thing they did was they melted the production support teams into the actual development teams. They took their tickets with them. And then that team itself was worried about getting that defect count down. However, I've also seen other transformations where they decide to keep production support around. And then it inadvertently creates what I've seen is it creates more work trying to figure out how the transformation itself is going to be successful and how to adopt this agile mindset, because you're not getting the whole point of you build it, you own it. I own this code, and whatever goes, I'm not handing it off. I'm going to have to live with my mistakes. And then you have the whole, well, is production support a shared service? I've seen that conversation come up. Are they a platform? And typically in safe environments, and it goes haywire. And I really think it comes down to the organizational inertia, where nobody wants to be the first one to say, okay, well, maybe we melt this department. And with that goes all these middle managers that, have defined their roles as being middle managers for the production support teams. Am I the only one that's seen that? Anybody? Am I the only one? I can't be the only one that's seen that.
We're going through it now at my current organization, but it's not black and white. I think we're so large, Fortune 500, we're looking at tier 3 blending into the teams. But if you think about it, we can't have, we have thousands of products. We can't have thousands of phone numbers and email addresses and whatnot to know to reach out for help, right? So there's got to be some funneling system to get people routed to the help they need, right?
Right. And I guess I should have been more specific. In my example, they keep tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 as their own separate entities. Where it seems like you're thinking along the lines of what I have seen, where you melt tier 3. Like you still have that first and second level triage.
That's right.
The people that actually have to do the work is the actual development team that built it in the first place. Okay, so you're a step ahead.
Well, strategically, execution is underway. Yeah. So tier 3 is blending into the team, and I'm a big believer in that. I want you to be as close as you can to. This is tough to both the customer and the work, right? So you've got to get the people building the product to be able to talk to the customer ultimately. I don't mind there being a routing and a triage system and let's make sure there's not a loose connection between the chair and the keyboard kind of stuff before you start hitting the team up with, your product's just not quite working right.
Make sure there's no pep check.
Yep.
I mean, in some large Fortune 500s, and depending on what industry you're in, you have to have that production support group because of regulatory concerns of separation of church and state.
That's right.
And their ability to touch production. So, some of it you actually can't avoid it, and because of the government in the United States. Now
we can do better and get rid of all humans from production, which is kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you can reduce the amount that humans are in production.
You can, and
I almost want to say, I think we're all saying the same thing in the sense of, I'm not sure, Jay, that's the way I see the problem. The problem is I see when things come through production support, that feedback loop is a gap. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come back into the organization possibly as quick or as desirable or at all, to the point where the organization now wants to invest in that feedback loop to accommodate and, develop a better product or deliver something that the feedback that they're getting. And it doesn't have, it doesn't have to be a year that they're getting consistent feedback. We can iterate so much faster now, but incorporating that feedback faster, that to me is where that gap is with having those teams outside the bubble. But they need to exist there in certain organizations. What are we doing to incorporate those teams, bringing the info back in?
It's a good point. That's a good point about the feedback loop. And I think my concern with this issue or situation, what have you, is really around the human thing, right? Because I worked at a place where they had a very, very tough time keeping their production support team staffed. They would get a lot of turnover and a lot of burnout. And when they started digging and asking, they came to find out that they would get these talented people who got bored working on fixing other people's stuff. And they got bored working on these old legacy systems where they were just supporting the maintenance and production, defects or production, changes, incidents, what have you. So, I think maybe, and this could be Freudian on the couch here, diagnosing myself. Maybe my problem is I don't think it's healthy for anybody to sit there and just fix other people's problems. I think you should be able to challenge yourself at a job and be able to learn new talents, new skills, new languages, new things, as well as juggle the this is broken, I need to sort of remediate, I need to rectify it. And I have that example in my head where we had trouble keeping intelligent, good development members on the production support staff because they were getting burnt out and bored and leaving, and then that's not good for anybody.
I've seen that before, Jay, but I've also been surprised that there are people who do like that kind of work, and they like the satisfaction of solving problems, and those problems, they just can count the number of problems they've solved in a day. And it shocked me too. I thought people would hate the drudgery, but some people do like it. So finding that right blend is possible. I've been pleasantly surprised anyway.
No, you're right. That does tickle some people's fancy.
But doesn't that lead you into the other component, Jay? Because was that just, I'm going to make an assumption here, but ask you the question, was it just an issue in that particular area or across the organization where there are more pockets like this?
So do you mean pockets of pieces that we're maintaining as we try and scale Agile, or?
No, meaning pockets of people that were just tired doing the same thing, the monotony, right? You said the developers didn't want to keep fixing other people's broken code.
You know what? It could be just giant chunks that I just happen to run across in my travels.
So that's something I think, the importance of culture and underestimating truly the level of effort it takes to change culture. I mean, going into a client, I always find it funny that I ask them how long they've been in business, and obviously let's say 30 years. They've built that. It's taken 30 years to build that culture. You're going to change that in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? I mean, it's insane to me. Do you think you can just arbitrarily throw out a couple months to deconstruct 30 plus years worth of culture building?
But that's what the vendor promised us, man. No,
Ouch. Sick burn, bro.
No. Hey, but I spent more of my life as a consultant. I happen to be enterprise right now. It's actually taken me something to get accommodated here, but no.
And I'm not going to disagree with you. Yes, but I think as a consultant, it's our responsibility. As a consultant, and I'll use myself in this. It's my responsibility to educate the client as far as that's, as Cusack says, you can't give me a 10-speed bicycle and tell me to go win the Indy 500. You can't do it. So it's just a matter of preparing the client to say, this stuff's hard. You're not going to get this done in 6 months. We can talk about what you can get done in 6 months, but it can't be that. Can't be everything. So if you want to invest in culture change, it's possible, but how much are you willing to work? And I know I kind of veered off a little bit there, but in the sense of, I do believe we underestimate the importance of culture, and that becomes an anti-pattern, or that is often a many.
That's a really good anti-pattern, Leff. And I'm actually gonna put Gifford on the spot, because Gifford is actually knee deep, elbows deep, hips deep, whatever, in an enterprise transformation, leading a transformation for an org. Gifford, what have you seen in this regard with trying to unpack your pre-existing culture and getting it down to a piece where you can actually pivot it or change direction or take chunks out of it and not create massive upheaval and pitchforks and torches in the cubicle rooms?
Well, it's kind of funny. The transformation. I joined the transformation a year in, so we're 2 years into a transformation, and we roughly have like 7 portfolio. At the end of the day, it'll probably be about 80 teams to transform the organization, but we've been kind of stalled out on 24 teams for 2 years, which by Agile transformation standpoint, where people would say, man, you guys suck. But it's because we have been kind of stopping and looking at, how can we fix the culture? How can we build trust in this organization? How can we bolster collaboration? How can we drive accountability? Accountability in a lot of organizations is fundamentally broken, and that's why you have a RACI diagram. That's why you have people saying, well, I can't do that, it's not my job, instead of making teams successful. So, we kind of keep coming back to, we do need to change the corporate culture. And in this year, we invested heavily into, our management, and, we introduced them to David Marquet's intent-based leadership. We introduced servant leadership. We started introducing them to Management 3.0. And we did that because there is a significant culture of learned helplessness at the organization where people want to be empowered, but the second that you empower them, they don't do anything. They're afraid. They're afraid of failure because there is no for us. And so all of these things that people clamor for and want, and and it comes out in our employee satisfaction surveys. And so the more that we work through this, we're making a fundamental investment in our leadership. And, we're getting ready to launch our next big acronym that most people will roll their eyes at, but it really focuses on a set of values and principles that sans agility, you need this to run a good business. A lot of the other stuff that we're kind of bringing in is more around servant leadership and actually changing the corporate culture to, making people better, making people awesome, making it safe to fail, changing our functional management structure from task management and managing work and really getting into a functional matrix prior to even going to Agile. So that way we can get managers focused on growing people as opposed to managing the work. Because we really want managers there to grow talent. Like we talk about growing, one of the things that I see a lot, I'll kind of shift gears on you, Jay, but when we see Agile transformations, we talk about process, we don't talk about technical practices. So one of the things that we're really looking at is if we're converting our functional managers to the grower of talent, we want to turn them into technical coaches so that we can have those functional managers teaching our teams fundamental practices like TDD, all the XP stuff, help them to show them strong mob program, strong pairing styles. Because going and hiring a technical coach today, you might as well just get your checkbook out and make it rain, because you can't hire technical consultants for very cost-effective margins anyway. So your only recourse is to grow those skills internally. And if you're like the company that I'm at, most of your managers are managers not because they were awesome leaders or had great management skills. It's because they were badass developers or badass testers.
Right. We've all talked about that path, how there's the path to success was not necessarily built upon what you're good at.
So why not turn them into technical coaches and figuring out how you get them to embody all of these Agile practices that are technical? And I'll shut the hell up.
It was good.
No, that's good, man.
Another one that I want to bring up, and I know Leff has a couple he wants to touch on. James made this as an offhand remark before we started recording, and it actually is something that I've lived through. Is we're going to transform to Agile, and we're going to scale through our organization, and then the company attempts to create a scaled Agile organization of component teams. So they're not cross-functional. They're all basically platforms. They're all components. I know I've seen this. I know Gifford has seen this, and I'm pretty sure Leff has seen this too. How do you coach away from that? How do you get someone to understand that, yeah, you can do it, but it's really not going to get you where you want to go? Thoughts? How do we prevent that?
So I don't know if you necessarily need to prevent it. I know that's probably a little bit of a wrong answer, but I get paid to fail every day, so I'm all right with it.
So you think let them go and then deal with the consequences?
Unfortunately, you can't force them to learn. I've tried so many different ways to force people to learn, and until I stopped doing that, made me realize it's not a great way to go. So I think you have to inspire them to learn on their own why there's value in not being all component teams. Like, you don't want to just have an Android development train and then an iOS development train that are developing the same features, but in different platforms. Why is that important? They may think that it isn't. And until they learn that, and how do you learn? You got to do it and fail forward. and understand when you fail, that's the learning to really kind of move the envelope. But I don't know if you should completely just say all component teams are bad.
No, I don't think that is. But my point is, I have seen an org try to stand up all component teams and say, we're not even going to investigate being cross-functional. We're not even going to investigate looking at capabilities. We're going to wave the magic Agile wand, and we're going to have a doc management team, and we're going to have a authentication team, and we're going to have this service team. And and then they real quickly get frustrated and don't understand why there is no speed increase, and the handoffs are still there. And I was at my wit's end trying to coach people out of that.
But if you think about it like this, Jay, is that a component team issue, or is that a organization issue? That these are all the kingdoms within my organization.
That's right.
I got to keep that in alignment, because that's what I run that area, right? So you're not going to tell me to go, give my budget to X person, and then what do? Have everyone matrixed out, and I have to manage people and not have this portfolio, whatever it might be. I think that's probably the, going back to that anti-pattern.
Some of that, Jay, we were at the same place. So a lot of that stemmed from the CTO's vision that you couldn't get quality out of a cross-functional team, that the best quality came from functional disciplines. And he didn't fundamentally believe in a functioning matrix or organization design. But, I've seen success with different kind of component teams where they're building things that enable other teams to deliver value. So if you're a company that is using JavaScript, and you're using like React, so we'll go to Angular because it's a little too easy, and a lot of that stuff's already been done for you. But early on in my career, I was exposed to Sencha.js, which is essentially just a reusable JavaScript framework to implement components quickly. So if you have a component team that is literally building elements that basically, instead of you going through and you've basically gone in and done user experience studies, you understand how your customers want to work, but you need to have just this quick library of reusable JavaScript components that if you need it. And so like if I need a data grid on this page, because we've just deemed that the standard for laying out data is a data grid, it's got these types of filters and it's actionable. There's groups of we have a group of developers building out these components. So now when a team that we may be light in the other parts of the organization on UI development, instead of them having to try to fumble around and do some skills that they're not well versed in, they have a simple component that's already provided. It's almost like copy paste and then bind your server side objects to that, so that you're implementing UIs fast because you don't have that skill set in your organization. That is where this component team becomes very valuable, because they're just turning out things that build out a library of stuff that other groups consume. So it's almost like a shared component through your organization. We've seen a lot of benefits from that, from a standardization of your user experience, as well as being able to go across any module in your platform and have a very consistent user experience. And that was a very valuable use of a component team. But the reason that it was successful is it didn't create bottlenecks for other teams. It was its own thing. It could deliver value and never screwed up the value stream. So there were no real weights and holds on that team. Where in your model, if we do a value stream map of it, clearly any simple story literally took 9 weeks to deliver or 6 weeks to deliver, and there was a lot of queuing and wait times, and that's really where your problem gets into, the reality.
So I'm gonna pivot a bit. I want to switch a little bit of gears, and I'm going to start with you with this one, Paul, because I think you and I have shared this story in our past experiences, where one of the anti-patterns we've both seen is the failure to secure what amounts to executive level sponsorship for your transformation. So meaning there's somebody somewhere who's moderately important decides we're going to go Agile, but he doesn't necessarily preach it all the way up. And you end up with almost butting your head against a glass ceiling. I know I've seen this one where it wasn't brought in all the way to the top and it created massive amounts of problems. Paul, I'm going to start with you. Have you seen this as well? And how do you? What's your suggestion to get around something like that?
Yeah, I think it's a killer problem. My first encounter of scaled agile framework was in a setting where we were being told, "Shh, don't tell anybody we're doing this." There was no seriously, and I got a really bad first encounter, I will say, to SAFe because of it. I actually have since gained a little bit of perspective and respect for it in certain situations. I think we all on this phone, because we've talked many times about this topic, I think descaling makes a hell of a lot more sense when you can, but I do have a newfound respect for a proper use of scaling as a starting point, maybe to start to make things visible and to begin to descale. But my first time in, it was be quiet. You know, we're doing this on our own, kind of trying to do it from the middle up. Not a good experience.
Does not sound like a good look. Andrew, I think you've been down this trench as well.
Yeah,
yes?
and I think, again, it's the journey. If we're coming in from an agile perspective, who's leading? Who's identified as the leader in this? You do need to lead the change. I mean, I don't want to keep referring to SAFe, but it's one of the major components of SAFe is lead the change. Train your lean agile leaders. Why do we neglect that? Why do we just think, okay, I'm going to now just listen to what I'm being told from a person that's never done it before? It's mind-boggling to me, or has done it, in the way that they were raised to do it without a lot of experience. I don't understand why there can't be more focus, or there isn't an appetite for more focus on really having leadership lead the change, or a leader, and no holds barred. They are all in, and they have executive support. They, following, Cotter, they define that vision. They build that guiding coalition. They enlist an army. I mean, it's all hands on deck. There has to be this excitement, this emotion, this energy to push forward and keep pushing forward. And you need that pillar. That's the foundation of all of this, in my opinion. I think you could alleviate a lot of these anti-patterns if you had that type of leadership that was active at all levels, right? Not behind a door, not sitting in a chair in an office, just looking at metrics, literally engaged all 24/7.
And I will bootstrap on that statement with something that I know that I've seen, and I think most of us on this conversation have seen as well, where the leader who is engaged and who is taking ownership and is driving it, that constant swimming against the tide, it burns them out. And then they end up either moved on unwillingly, or they end up moving on. And then you end up with a ship that a rocket that you've launched, but then your navigation's out. And I think that might be another thing we might want to unpack in a different episode at another time, is what happens when the guy leading the change and the woman leading the change goes off to different pastures. And then what happens?
The only thing I want to say on that, Jay, and then I'll shut up, is it's interesting, though, that in my experience, a lot of those individuals, when they leave, it might be not the next company, or it could be, but one or two companies removed from where they were, oh my God, they end up leading the change. They end up making the impact that they were trying to do in the company they're in. Not everyone's the right fit. So I think you have to it's the support of the mindset at that point. If they were able to at least start something, bring someone in that can continue to do it. But when you're constantly flipping switches, all right, now we're going to do this. We're going to call it this. All right, well, we started down the SAFe model. Now we're going to go Spotify because we read that works places. Now that doesn't work. Let's go less. Let's try that. The frameworks never fail. So I don't understand. Again, it's just that investment in the desire to change, as well as the intestinal fortitude for the amount of pain you're going to have to go to support the change.
But to go with some of that pain, people need to have the balls to manage people out of their organization that are just going to continue to drag down the change.
Sure.
That is a realistic thing. If you want to change your company, if you want to change the mindset, if you want to change the culture, you will have the people that will not change, and you need to be willing to manage them out of your organization. And Alistair posted a long time ago on Facebook an article about a company that literally started, they went out and bought a new building, they introduced Agile to people and said, hey, there's this great new place that we want you to come work, and if you think that you want to do X, Y, and Z, and which was basically the Agile mindset, if you want to do this and this interests you, come on over to the building. We have lots of work for you. The rest of you, hey, great. You can stay over here and keep working the way you want to work. And over the course of time, they dwindled down to the small pocket of people that were left in the other building. And those people were gracefully departed from the organization. And people need to be willing to make those tough decisions. How many people have they, they just don't have the, you got to have empathy for people, but if they're boat anchors, they just need to be gone. And you need to have the balls to take them out.
Sure.
Yeah, that was Borland, right, Gifford? That they opened a new building, Borland Technologies?
Yes, if I remember correctly, yes.
So there's another one, and I'm going to start with you again, Paul, because I know you're big in the DevOps space. Another anti-pattern that I think a lot of us see, and I think Leff threw this in the show notes, was the neglect of the need for technical excellence. How people want to talk about scaling and they want to talk about SAFe, not to bag on SAFe. SAFe's the biggest one in the market, so it's what most of us are experienced with. But they see that big picture and they forget that all of this, the underpinning is technical excellence and technical practices, technical disciplines. And what have you seen, Paul, where companies will say, okay, we're going to go scale, but they forget that it comes down to XP and paired programming and automated testing. And how do you get around that ginormous rock Gibraltar in the middle of the stream?
I'm more a practitioner. I've never actually labeled myself as a coach, and I'll say that I actually haven't seen that. I have seen that tech chops is a part of it almost always. I mean, I think I more talk to other people that tell me those horror stories than my own personal experience, but they're not, the management doesn't know what these things really mean. And I'll hear people say, well, yeah, we do test-driven development. We always think about what we're going to test before the end of the quarter. And it's like, well, you might not know what test-driven development is then. Okay. Let me just say, I'm in a situation now, but just harken back to the previous point of having that executive support, where the executive support's the best I've ever seen. The CEO was in PI planning last week. The CIO is there. The executive support is strong, but there's this, we call it the frozen middle, right? That's tough, especially for a culture that's plus 100 years old.
Yeah, and so I've seen a lot of that, Jay, in regard to the lack of quality. So that's this distrust with the code we develop and test, that we have to do a bazillion different testing cycles because, oh man, if that goes out into production, that's going to be horrible. Well, is it? And I think that's, again, I used to say a company I used to work for, if someone doesn't go to jail, we might be all right. So use that as the first sniff test. If you go to jail, if you release this into production, that's something we need to fix. Absolutely, like urgent. But that being said, where is the software craftsmanship career path? I think if we dig a little deeper into the root, some of the root cause behind the technical excellence is teams are not doing Scrum very well. And if they go to a scale, or they want to scale their framework or scale their practice, now you're just amplifying crappy coders,
right?
Crappy testers. So when do we invest, or when do the developers continue to invest in their own career to continue to learn, get hungry? And one of the clients I was working at, we had a library. We actually created an entire library of books. We carved out capacity within our sprints for learning. Like it wasn't a negotiation. You had to do it. So literally, but you weren't forced, but the people that did start to utilize this learning became better or more curious even. So their experience started to influence the team. But I think there has to be that investment, not only at the individual level, but the organizations have to support it. And it can't be, hey, I'm going to send you, to a training once a year. I don't know if that's enough. You have to be proud of the code you're writing. You have to be proud of the stuff you're testing. There has to be pride in that work. And if people are just, pumping out lines of code but don't really care and don't have much pride in their work, I don't know if you can really get to that technical excellence.
Yeah, things are getting faster and faster all the time. I started writing my first code in another decade or 2 or 3. And now I can't imagine how you can hold a job for 2 years even, and you only dedicate time on the job. And if the job doesn't put learning into the diet, what do? You're not learning anything new for 2 years? That's got to be fatal.
Yeah, well, that's lack of intellectual curiosity. That transcends cultural problems, and that's more of like what type of people are you actually hiring? That's a lack of intellectual curiosity. It's a big one. Gifford, what do you think? Reaction.
My reaction is people need to understand what clean coding is. They need to understand the solid principles. Talking to this one group that we haven't even transformed yet, but we're in the talks with them. They have files in their file system that literally get touched almost on a daily basis, but they have a 10% unit test coverage in that physical code base. So literally, if you have a high touch file where you're literally touching it daily, your unit test percentage, if you're looking at like technical excellence, code coverage, you need to have high test coverage on that, because you're literally just creating this bed of code that is basically just going to cause you errors and bugs and problems. And so that gets into like single object, getting classes where classes only own one thing. And people don't look at those software patterns because the leaders haven't been there. That, it's basically hack it together, make it work. We're under a deadline. And so over the years, the software patterns haven't actually been able to be created of what a good software pattern looks like at this company. And so it goes back to Uncle Bob and getting into clean coding and teaching people the solid principles and most of the XP foundations. And that's everywhere that I go. We run Scrum Plus, but we run Scrum Plus Kanban. We run Scrum Plus. We forget about XP. I have developers that just do not believe in collective code ownership, that I wrote some code. The rest of the team owns the same code. So we should make it clean and reusable and testable. And all of these principles they're just not there because people don't see the value in it.
To steal a quote from Troy Lightfoot, when you try to scale garbage, you end up in the landfill, which it was one of his. That was actually a completely sober bond mot that I actually really enjoyed. Paul, you got another one for us?
Yeah. I had done some homework on this, and it was personal experience as well as PI planning without people that are going to be doing the work. And again, this isn't all about SAFe. SAFe has been the scaling framework that, especially in the U.S., maybe it's just been around the longest, but it's the one we talk about. We've got ideas of doing some podcasts down the line in a series where we're going to talk about Les and Dad and the individual ones. But so I guess this counts for any of the scaling frameworks. But the big planning session where the people who aren't going to do the work are nowhere to be found. That's an anti-pattern that really bothers me, and it's also part of my first encounter with SAFe that bothered me. So it took me a while to get over SAFe because I thought it was something. It was really just an abusive use of the term. It really wasn't what was intended.
So Paul, give me I'm struggling with the question or the anti-pattern. So you're saying you have individuals in a PI planning that are there, but they're just there to hang out?
No, they're not even invited. So it's pretty much the product management folks planning how much work the doers are going to get done without talking to the doers.
So that's not PI planning, right? So
no, of course not. But I was told that that's what it was, and so That was my first encounter.
Got it. I'll be honest. I've had some interesting experiences when launching trains, and and have literally gone into an organization where my first day was launching a train at a PI planning. But I haven't experienced that, to be honest with you. I've had very good exposure in the sense of the teams are there. The people that are doing the work, I have the entire organization that is supporting the product or whatever the planning is for is in the room or distributed and at least on the phone.
I have seen something like what Paul's experiencing, where they only sent the product owner, the scrum master, and the tech lead, and they were responsible for doing all the dependency mapping and commitments, and that was and I don't know why. I think the argument was made because it was, air quotes, too expensive to travel. I personally think there were some other motivations and machinations at large here. But yeah, I have seen the same thing. And the PI, I think it was one or two that I saw it, they didn't go well. They weren't good PIs because you had either overcommitments or undercommitments. You had that time thief that Dominican de Grandes talks about, the unplanned dependencies, and it got really hinky about two and a half sprints in. Everything was exploding left and right, and that's why we had the wrong people in the room trying to plan that they didn't have their hands around what they were trying to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around that for some reason. That's just. I have been doing this for a bit, and I struggle to get, just during planning, like, it's essential for my teams to come in with their features broken down into stories 80 to 90% complete to go into planning. It's planning. That's what you go in there to do. It's your 10-week forecast for the next 10 weeks. I just don't understand how that. Yeah, that one baffles me. I hope I never experienced that.
I've seen it twice, and it does baffle me, and it is painful.
Wow, Leff is actually speechless. Gifford, Have you run into this? Run into this monster planning without people who are actually going to do the work?
You always have the chickens that show up. I've experienced it, and it's. At the current organization, we've done a really good job of really minimizing it and focusing on how we actually plan work. But there have been a lot of organizations where people show up and they're like, well, I want a commitment. I know that we literally 10 minutes before this meeting, we gave you everything you wanted to do that we would like to accomplish in this period. But, and I expect you to commit to that by the end of this planning session. And it's been horrible. We have a very kind of structured planning process in place where we're doing it, and a lot of people make fun of the name, but because we branded it something crazy. But we plan for 2 weeks. We plan for basically 12 weeks, because there's 12 weeks in a quarter. We give a week for planning and innovation, or continuous learning, because that's where we're at. But we expect teams to come in with some high level points. We expect that they understand generally where the business wants to go in the next quarter, and they show up with that, and they show up ready to plan. Is it always good? Is it always great? Does the business get us the information we need all the time? No, but we factor that in, and there's some give and take in the schedules. But pretty much the team has a week where we do 3 days of, basically 2.5 days of planning. We have a global demo for the entire enterprise, and then the teams have 2 days to continuously learn. If they want to do a training class, if they want to, if we could scrape together the cash and bring Woody Zool in, and he wanted to do mob programming with a couple workshops for 2 teams for 2 days, we can figure that out. But that's our cycle, and we've got people committed to that. We've got the business pretty much committed to it. We've got the all of our other internal stakeholders committed to it, and we have less of the chicken showing up unless we need them. And there are times and specific points where we actually bring them in And we know that by the end of that planning, that itemized list of the most top important things is what's potentially going to be delivered, and we're willing to commit to it because the teams are comfortable and confident and they've seen it soon enough. And that's what makes it semi-successful.
Yeah, so listening to you guys talk through this, and it just what's resonating to me is if you go back again, if you want to dissect it, the root cause of that, doesn't that feel like we haven't, pretty much gone around to, alleviate or move away from the command and control model?
That's correct.
The failure to decentralize control and
That's
truly
right.
look at it as, I don't trust that they'll be able to do this. So I'm going to do it and give them the plan.
That's right.
Right? Or, hey, now I have a contract. Here's what you need to do. You sign at the dotted line, and now we're under contract.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, it's now that I hear you guys walk through that, that's just what's exploding in my brain.
But the manifesto is contract negotiation over customer collaboration, isn't it?
Well,
I don't even think the word manifesto comes up, though, in typical PI training for some folks.
No, and that's a whole different argument for a different day. Well, gentlemen, I think we're quickly approaching time, so I want to go around the horn for any final thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Gifford. I know you were just talking, so any final thoughts?
So my thought is, instead of scaling agility across your enterprise, maybe you start descaling your enterprise. Maybe you should look at what the value is in your organization and align teams around values, and stop worrying about big scaling frameworks and focus on delivering value to your customers. Maybe you'd have less problems with your scaling profits.
Hear. Paul, final thoughts?
My newfound respect that I mentioned earlier in the podcast for scaling frameworks is, I think if it can help you see the reality of the work that you have in front of you, that invisible work, and the coordination and the dependencies that you have across teams, I like it. But don't stop there. You're not buying a solution that you stick with forever. That's a starting point to shine a light on things. I like it for that.
Perfect. And Andrew?
Yeah, so, as you go through your transformation, no matter what part of the journey is, be aware that those anti-patterns, when they pop up, spend the time and energy to focus on them, to address them. They become amplified as you do scale as an organization. And something a coach that I worked with, as well as a mentor of mine, said something to me was very compelling, in the sense of, let's stop trying to make the company agile. Let's build agile people, right? It echoes what both Paul and Gifford had stated, is focus on value, right? Let's invest in our people to be more agile, to help to support agility within the organization. I think that's, at the end of the day, that's where, my heart lies.
And I don't think we could have asked for a better way to wrap up this episode. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, gentlemen. So on behalf of all of us on this episode, we'd like to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, please give us a review, a rating, or leave us comments on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or your podcasting platform of choice. It does help others find us, and we do take your comments to heart. There will be a thread about this podcast posted on coalition.agileuprising.com. So feel free to hop in, join the discussion, share your experiences with scaling anti-patterns, descaling anti-patterns, and how best to deal with them. And last but not least, we do have a Patreon set up for those of you that would like to help us cover hosting and production costs. Look into our show notes for details on how you can become a patron. Until next time, this is the Agile Uprising Podcast, signing out.